I was born in the bowels of this city and have never seen the sky. In Hive Septia, our beloved prison of metal and rot, only the richest souls at the spire's tip ever glimpse the sun. For those of us toiling in the lower manufactorum levels, daylight is a myth. We wake to the blare of klaxons echoing through rusted hab block corridors. We breathe acrid recycled air that tastes of oil and ash. Even the water we drink is recycled runoff from above, and our daily ration bars are spun from algae or corpse starch. Life here is a ceaseless grind of duty and fear, sustained by stale nutrients and the will of the God Emperor. My morning began like any other, hunched in a packed transit car hurtling through the Hive's arterial tunnels. Shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other grey-faced labourers, I clutched the overhead rail as the transport shook and coughed smog. A crackling vox speaker in the carriage corner droned an imperial litany. To serve is to suffer is to be purified. Praise the Emperor's name. Everyone mouthed along dutifully. Not doing so would invite suspicion, or worse, a visit from the enforcers. I stepped off at manufactorum sector 17, boots hitting the metal grate floor. With a clang, the colossal factory chamber yawned before me, rows of assembly lines vanishing into dim haze, illuminated by flickering yellow lumen strips. The air stank of chem solder and sweat. Already the overseer's whips were cracking in the distance, urging laggards to their stations. I hurried to my post on conveyor 7B. On a good day, I assemble autogun components for 16 hours, then catch a few hours of sleep before the next shift. On a bad day, someone makes a mistake and body parts end up on the line. I've seen it happen. A friend from my hab block lost 2 fingers last month to a press stamper. The medical aide from the infirmary, a slight young woman with auburn hair and steady hands, rushed in to stanch the bleeding as best she could. Even so, he was back at work the next day, bloody rags wrapped around the stumps. A missing hand is no excuse to miss quota. The overseer made him apologize to the machine for impeding its sacred work. Such is life under the ever-watchful eyes of the Imperium. Today, my machine spirit was merciful. I finished my shift with all limbs intact and my output tallies just above the minimum required. Exhausted and grime-streaked, I filed out with the rest of the shift change. The moment we stepped into the transit station, we were halted by a booming shout. Stand to. Identity checks. Armed arbitrators in matte black carapace armor blocked the platform. Their visors glinted red as they scanned us. The Adeptus Arbites rarely venture this deep, unless something is wrong. My heart thudded. We formed ragged lines. One by one, the enforcers marched down, checking papers and hab codes, their cyber mastiffs sniffing for contraband or mutation. I kept my eyes down, praying silently. Emperor, let me pass unnoticed. 2 men ahead of me, a scrawny worker, fumbled his papers with shaking hands. Perhaps he had some forbidden pamphlet, or was just terrified. It didn't matter. With a snarl, an arbitrator slammed him against the wall. Possible infection, the officer barked to his partner. Infection. The rest of us exchanged nervous glances. The scrawny man sputtered that he just had a cough, but the arbitrator already jammed a shock prod into his gut. He collapsed, twitching. They dragged him away like a sack of grain. We all stared rigidly forward, pretending not to see. In the Imperium, curiosity can be fatal. When my turn came, I handed over my ident slate with a steady hand. The arbitrator's unreadable helmet loomed close. For 3 breaths I imagined my life ending, right there on that platform for no reason at all. Then, with a grunt, he shoved the slate back at me. Move on. I exhaled and hurried along, lungs burning from the tension. Back in the warren of the hab blocks, the shift's end always brings a brief semblance of life to these tomb-like halls. I squeezed through crowds of off-duty labourers, habwives queuing for water rations, a clutch of pale, scrumbled children chasing a wind-up toy servo skull down the corridor. The usual cacophony of hive life echoed, distant machinery hums, crying babies, muffled shouts from cramped apartments, and from somewhere above, the sonorous chanting of the evening prayer service. As I made my way to my unit, an unsettling commotion drew my attention to the central plaza of our hab level. A ragged man stood atop a broken plasteel crate, shouting at the passing throng. He wore tattered administratum robes stained with filth, and his eyes were wild with fervour. "Hear me," he cried, voice cracking. "Open your eyes to the truth. The air itself reeks of death. The Plague Father comes." A few people slowed their pace to listen or jeer. Most hurried past, unwilling to be seen near a possible heretic. I should have kept walking, but something about his words gave me pause. I lingered at the plaza's edge, half hidden behind a pillar. The madman raised his arms, sores visible on his forearms. "Even to hope is to despair. So despair, and in your desperation, find purpose. The false emperor cannot save you from the rot that blooms below. The hive shall fall. Grandfather Nurgle embraces us all." My blood ran cold. The crowd murmured anxiously at the open heresy. Across the plaza, I saw two uniformed enforcers pushing their way towards the ranting vagrant. He saw them too and let out a shrill laugh. "Fools, you cannot stop what's already here." Before he could say more, one of the enforcers raised a heavy shotgun. I winced as the retort boomed in the enclosed space. The madman crumpled backward, off his crate, a spray of blood misting the air. His body hit the floor with a wet thud. There was no scream from the onlookers, only a collective silence of suppressed terror. The enforcers hauled the corpse away, trailing dark blood. One barked at us. "Disperse. Return to your habs. Worship the Emperor and fear not the heretic's lies." The plaza emptied quickly. I realized I was trembling. The man's words echoed in my head. "The rot that blooms below." I forced myself homeward. Such displays of dissent were not unheard of. Hive life drove many to madness or rebellion, but his rant felt different, crawling under my skin. Perhaps it was the use of that word, Nurgle. I had never heard it before, but it left a foul taste in my mouth. Inside my tiny hab unit, I slid the door shut and bolted it. Only then did I let out a shuddering breath. Safe, for now. I peeled off my sweat-soaked work coat and splashed a little recycled water on my face from the sink spout. In the cracked mirror above, a gaunt, hollow-eyed young man stared back. Grease and grime streaked my skin and dark hair. Just another anonymous drone of the hive, but behind the exhaustion in my brown eyes lurked something new. Fear. What if the ranting man wasn't entirely mad? He spoke of a plague. Our hive always battled illnesses, factory cough, rat fever. Yet, something in the arbitrator's reaction today, in that word infection, had struck me. And the sores on the man's arms. Was there truly a sickness spreading? A disease the authorities were trying to keep quiet? My mind chased rumours I'd overheard in passing. A section of the lower sump sealed off last week. Whispers of an entire hab level under quarantine after a mysterious illness. I dismissed such talk as baseless gossip. Now, I wasn't so sure. I sank onto my cot, the springs creaking under me. Through the thin wall, I could hear my neighbour's low murmur as he led his family in the nightly prayer to the Emperor. Normally that routine comforted me, a ritual of certainty in an uncertain world. But tonight I found no comfort. My gaze drifted to the small altar on my own wall, a faded picture of the God Emperor's stern visage, a stub of incense long burned out, the oath of allegiance written beneath. I tried to mouth the familiar words. "Though the darkness surrounds me, I am fearless, for the Emperor is my light." But the words felt hollow. Darkness was indeed surrounding us, in the seeping walls, in the fetid air, and perhaps in something worse, lurking unseen. That night I struggled to sleep. When unconsciousness finally dragged me under, my dreams were fevered and filled with decay. I saw the hive rusting and crumbling, its people withering like corpses. I heard a grandfatherly chuckle echoing in the endless halls. In my dream, I ran through collapsing corridors, searching desperately for something or someone as a wave of rot rose behind me. I jolted awake in the early hours of the new cycle, drenched in sweat and heart pounding. It was just a nightmare, but I could still smell the phantom scent of rot lingering in my nostrils. I hugged my knees on the cot until the first shift klaxon began to wail. A new day had arrived, and with it, perhaps the beginning of horrors I could not yet imagine. The next work cycle began in uneasy silence. News of the previous day's mad heretic had spread through the manufactorum like oil on water. I caught snippets of whispers as I took my place on the line. Talk of a quarantine in the lower sump, of more arbitrator raids during the night. Fear was coiled in every hiver's gut, tightening with each rumour. Still, we worked. What else could we do? Refusal meant execution for dereliction. Obedience was our only option, even if it led us straight into the jaws of whatever was coming. By mid-shift, the heat in Sector 17 was stifling. Sweat dripped off my brow as I fixed a firing pin into its housing for the 1000th time. Across the assembly line, I noticed old Marek slumped over his station. He was a veteran labourer, skin leathery with chemical burns, known for never missing a beat. Now his shoulders shook as he coughed violently into his hands. Our overseer's bellow cut through the clangor. Marek, back to work. Marek tried to straighten, but then doubled over. Something thick and dark splattered onto the metal press. My heart skipped. Blood. The old man was coughing up blood. He wavered on his feet, and a chorus of gasps rose around him. In seconds, everything devolved into chaos. Marek let out a wet, gurgling howl and toppled into the machinery. I heard bones crack as the press caught his arm. Screams rang out. 2 workers moved to pull him free, but Marek, Emperor help us. Marek lunged at them instead. His eyes had a milky film, and flecks of blood frothed at his mouth. With unnatural strength, he threw himself onto one colleague, knocking the man flat. Before I could process what was happening, Marek sank his teeth into the poor bastard's cheek and tore. Someone on my left retched. Panic surged through me. This wasn't just a seizure or rad poisoning. It was madness. The bitten man shrieked as Marek, or the thing Marek had become, chewed and swallowed a chunk of his flesh with feral fervour. Blood poured onto the conveyor, slick and bright. "Contain him," the overseer shouted, though he sounded far more terrified than commanding. Workers scattered from their stations, some running, others frozen in place. I saw a trio of enforcers in hazard masks rush in from a side door, shock batons at the ready. Marek rose from the twitching body of his victim. His arm, still caught in the press, had ripped off just below the elbow, but he seemed not to notice the fountain of gore. He turned toward the oncoming enforcers, a guttural growl issuing from a throat that should not be capable of it. As he stumbled forward, I saw foul fluids, yellow-green pus and blood, weeping from burst boils on his neck. The enforcers didn't hesitate. Crack. A shock baton discharged, the high-voltage jolt striking Marek in the chest. His body convulsed, but he barely faltered. Another enforcer fired a slug round from his pistol. The shot blew out Marek's kneecap with a spray of corrupted tissue, finally dropping him. Even then, Marek kept clawing at the floor, trying to pull himself toward the nearest living person. It took 2 more point-blank shots to his head to end his writhing. I realized I had backed away nearly to the wall, my hands shaking. Around me, dozens of workers were crying out, some injured in the stampede to escape. The enforcers who had put Marek down were now barking orders. Everyone on the ground, down now. Before I could comply, a strong hand grabbed my arm. I spun, half ready to fight, but found myself face to face with the medicae aide, the same young woman with auburn hair who had bandaged my friend's hand weeks ago. Her grey work smock was stained with blood, and I realized she must have rushed in when the commotion started. "Help me," she hissed, tugging my arm. Only then did I see she was kneeling beside a wounded man on the floor, the one Marek had bitten. The victim was alive but in shock, clutching his mauled face where a cheek used to be. For an instant, I was paralyzed. The enforcers were moving to secure the area, and I knew if we stayed, we might be quarantined or executed on the spot. Yet, the medicae girl was bravely trying to save this man amid the chaos, her eyes fierce with determination. Leaving her crossed my mind, every man for himself, but I couldn't. Not after she looked right at me with equal parts desperation and resolve. I dropped to a knee on the other side of the moaning patient. "What do you need?" I asked, voice barely steady. "Pressure on the wound," she said, already peeling off her outer tunic to use as a bandage. I pressed the cloth to the man's torn face, attempting to ignore the warm blood seeping through my fingers. The medicae retrieved a small injector from her kit and plunged it into his neck, likely a coagulant or painkiller. All around, boots thudded and voices shouted. The factory alarm was blaring now, a harsh klaxon, an automated vox repeating, "Biohazard alert, lockdown in effect, all personnel remain at your stations." Massive bulkhead doors began to slam down over the exits. The enforcers were corralling terrified workers, forcing them to their stomachs for inspection. I saw one officer begin to drag the injured victim from us, likely to separate the wounded. The medicae girl, no, she deserved a name in my mind now. I recalled someone calling her Alara, refused to let go of her patient. "He'll bleed out," she protested, as an enforcer yanked at the man's collar. "Back away, medicae," the enforcer ordered through his rebreather mask, leveling his shotgun vaguely in our direction. "This area is under quarantine by order of the governor, by imperial law." He never finished. A thunderous boom rattled the manufactorum, an explosion somewhere above, followed by a tremor that knocked tools from their racks. In the split second the enforcer looked up, I acted on pure instinct. Grabbing Alara's hand, I pulled her and the injured man behind a stack of supply crates. The enforcer's attention had shifted, and the others were momentarily distracted by the blast. It was utter bedlam now. Alarms, smoke, the screams of confused workers. "There's no time," I shouted to Alara over the din. "We have to get out, or we're as good as dead." I hated the words even as they left my mouth. Leaving the wounded man felt like a betrayal, but staying meant all of us being caught in whatever purge was coming. Her eyes darted from the unconscious worker to the encroaching enforcers. I could see the agony of the decision written on her face, but she nodded, just once, jaw set, and eyes shining with tears of frustration. Together we slipped into the shadows, just as the nearest bulkhead slammed shut with a resounding crash, sealing much of the workforce inside. We half carried, half dragged the bleeding man along a side corridor that hadn't yet been locked down. My heart pounded. At any moment I expected a shout, a gunshot to stop us, but the confusion worked in our favor. Through a combination of luck and frantic haste, we stumbled into a maintenance tunnel that led away from Sector 17. Alara led the way, clearly familiar with the Hive's warren of passages. The injured worker hung limply off my shoulder, semi-conscious and moaning. The maintenance tunnel was barely lit, the only illumination a faint red emergency glow from panels along the floor. We advanced in painful increments, each step a struggle with our burden. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small storage alcove, far from the main assembly floor. My arms and back ached from supporting the wounded man's weight. We laid him gently on the ground against a crate. Alara knelt to check his pulse and pupils. "How is he?" I managed between gulps of the stale air. Her hands were slick with his blood, trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Not good," she whispered. "He's lost a lot of blood, and that bite." She trailed off, not needing to finish. The wound was ragged and already looked terribly infected, blackened veins spreading outward from the torn flesh. I wiped sweat from my brow, trying to think. If we find the infirmary, can you treat him? Ilara pushed back a strand of her blood-matted hair, leaving a smear across her cheek. In the dim red light, I saw just how young she was, near my age, early 20s perhaps, yet bearing the weight of all this death like a seasoned veteran. I can try, she said, voice hollow, but the infirmary is on the other side of the lockdown. Emperor. She choked on the honorific, a brief sob of frustration escaping her. We're cut off. I glanced back the way we came. We could hear distant muffled thumps and shouting from beyond the sealed bulkheads. Whatever was happening in there, we had escaped it for the moment, but we were by no means safe. Ilara, right? I said gently. I'm Jonas. It seemed strange introducing myself in such a hellish moment, but clinging to formality helped stave off panic. She managed a faint, mirthless smile. Jonas, thank you for helping me back there. Her eyes flicked to our patient. And for this, I shook my head. I couldn't just leave you. A truth hung unspoken between us. I also didn't want to be alone. Before I could say more, the wounded man coughed wetly, a horrid gargling sound. Ilara leaned in. He's burning up, she said, touching his forehead. I don't understand. That was so fast. Her voice was laced with fear and confusion. The man's veins around the bite were now darkening to an ugly purple green. He thrashed suddenly, a convulsion shaking his limbs. I had to pin his shoulders to the floor to keep him still. His eyes flew open, and to my horror, they were clouded like Marek's had been. Ilara gasped as the man's mouth opened in a snarl. Just minutes ago, he'd been a co-worker in need. Now his split face twisted in feral rage. He bucked against me with startling strength, nearly breaking loose. No, Ilara cried, fumbling for something in her medikit. The man's hands clawed at my arms. I wrestled with him, shocked at his strength despite grievous injury. A low growl emanated from his throat as he snapped his teeth mere inches from my face. Ilara suddenly jammed a syringe into the side of the man's neck. She depressed the plunger, and within seconds, the struggling lessened. Our patient, our former patient, slackened, head lolling to the side. He wasn't dead, but whatever she injected sedated him deeply, and his eyelids fluttered shut. I fell back, catching my breath. My forearm throbbed where his nails had raked me. 4 red streaks, but the skin wasn't broken. I shuddered, looking at the poor soul on the floor. His chest still rose and fell faintly. This close in the low light, I noticed his tongue and gums already blackening with rot, and an awful stench wafting from his wound. It was as if the disease was eating him alive from the inside out. This is impossible, Ilara whispered. Her expression was caught between scientific disbelief and dawning horror. No natural infection progresses this fast. It's not natural, I said, the certainty in my voice surprising me. I thought of the heretic's dying words in the plaza, the rot that blooms below, and the name he invoked, Nurgle. Something is very wrong in this hive. Ilara nodded slowly, tears of stress brimming in her eyes but not falling. We need to get out of here, Jonas. If the authorities have quarantined the factorum, Emperor knows what they'll do to anyone they suspect is infected. She gently closed the half-eaten eyelid of the sedated man. They'll purge everyone, sick or not. I felt a chill despite the sweltering tunnel. She was right. In the Imperium, viral outbreaks often met with extreme sanction. I had heard whispers that whole star systems could be isolated when plague runs rampant, proud populations left to wither and die. If such a fate had come to Hive Septia, we had to move quickly. Come on, I said, offering Ilara my hand. We can't help him further, but maybe we can help ourselves. I tried to keep my voice gentle. She hesitated, then accepted my hand and rose unsteadily to her feet. Together we left the sedated, dying man in the darkness, our hearts heavy. Neither of us said it, but we both wondered if we'd just abandoned him to become another monster like Marek. The thought was too much to bear, so we focused on survival. As we slipped away through the maintenance passages, I silently prayed to the Emperor for deliverance, but with each step into the unknown, that prayer felt more futile. In the shadows of the Hive's underbelly, hope was already rotting away. We navigated through the maintenance passages in a state of shock. The distant thuds and screams from the manufactorum gradually faded behind us, replaced by an eerie quiet. I led the way now, guiding Alara through narrow shafts and access halls that honeycombed the lower hive. My mind raced. I needed supplies, a weapon, anything. And more than anything, I felt a desperate urge to reach my home hab block. It wasn't safety exactly, but it was familiar. Perhaps there I could gather my wits and pray the situation topside was not as dire as it seemed. After a time, we emerged from a service hatch into a deserted transit corridor. The conveyor rails here were still, power cut. Red emergency lumens cast our shadows long and gaunt on the steel walls. As we crept along, I saw evidence that whatever plagued the factorum was spreading. Bloody handprints smeared a stairwell railing. Spent shell casings glinted on the floor. The lights flickered in and out, and in one moment of darkness we nearly tripped over a pile of bodies. Alara clapped a hand to her mouth to stifle a cry when she saw them. 3 people, an entire family perhaps, lay sprawled, lifeless in a corner, their skin ashen and lips blackened. They had died huddled together, a mother's arm still wrapped around 2 young sons in a final embrace. There was nothing we could do except whisper a shaken prayer and move on. We encountered more signs of carnage as we went. A collapsed bulkhead had blocked part of our path, forcing us to climb through a jagged gap. As I helped Alara over the rubble, my eyes caught a strange symbol scrawled on the bent metal. 3 interconnected circles, arranged in a triangle pattern, drawn in a streak of dried brownish blood. I paused, unease prickling down my neck. I had seen graffiti in the Hive before, gang tags, obscenities, but this was different. I didn't know what it meant, but somehow I felt it was related to the madness unfolding around us. Alara noticed it too, frowning. "We should keep going," she whispered, and I nodded, pushing the disturbing marking from my mind. Soon we were nearing the residential zone of my hab block, if my sense of direction was right. The corridors widened and I recognized a fresco of the Emperor's Aquila on a wall that marked the entrance to the workers' habs. We turned a corner and immediately shrank back into the shadows. The open atrium of Hab Level 6 lay before us, lit by flickering overhead lumens. It was normally a bustling common space, where off-duty hivers queued for rations, or caught a few minutes of chatter. Now, it was a battleground. A makeshift barricade of overturned Hab furniture had been erected at the far archway. Behind it, a handful of Hive residents armed with pipes and a las cutter were fending off a crowd of shrieking, plague-ridden attackers. The infected slammed into the barricade with abandon, men and women with pustule-covered faces, eyes wild and teeth bared. I counted at least 10 of them. The defenders looked to be regular citizens, terror in their eyes as they jabbed with their improvised weapons to keep the infected at bay. Even as we watched, one infected brute vaulted over the barricade, only to be met with a burst of las fire from the cutter that seared a hole through his chest. He fell writhing, but another took his place, clawing at a man on the line. The victim screamed as dirty nails raked his forearm. Alara clutched my arm. "We can't go through there," she breathed. It was the only direct route to my unit, but she was right. The atrium was a death trap. As we retreated, a new sound echoed through the hall, the barking report of heavy rifles. From a side passage, a squad of uniformed soldiers stormed in, the local planetary defense force, identifiable by their flak armor and blue uniforms. "Get down, clear the area," their sergeant shouted. What followed was a brutal display. The civilians behind the barricade cried for help, but the PDF troopers opened fire on the infected without mercy or hesitation. Auto rounds shredded through diseased flesh, spraying blood across the ferrocrete floor. Within moments, all of the attackers were downed in heaps of perforated meat. I felt a brief surge of relief, until one of the surviving civilians rushed forward, thanking the Emperor for deliverance. He barely got a word out before the soldiers gunned him down as well. Point blank, aghast, I watched as the remaining healthy citizens screamed and tried to flee. The PDF cut them down too, with chilling detachment. Within half a minute, the barricade defenders, who had survived the infected, were all dead or dying, riddled with bullets. I had to clamp a hand over my own mouth to stifle a shout of horror and rage. Ilara was shaking beside me, eyes wide with shock. We remained hidden in an alcove, peering out as the squad sergeant gave curt orders to his men. "Burn the bodies, no chances." One trooper unlimbered a flamer unit from his back, and with a whoosh, bathed the pile of corpses, infected and innocent alike, in a wash of promethium fire. The stench of charred flesh and putrid decay rolled down the corridor. Tears of anger blurred my vision as we slipped away quietly down a side hall before the soldiers could sweep the perimeter and spot us. The Imperium's solution to this nightmare was as I feared: purge everything. I understood the ruthless logic. Better to kill 100 than risk one plague carrier escaping. But it crushed me to see my people slaughtered like vermin after all they'd endured. "Jonas," Ilara whispered, snapping me out of my daze. "Your HAB unit, is it nearby?" I wiped my face, composing myself. Yes, just one level up. There was another access route, a back stair that might bypass the atrium. We found it after a short detour through a storage hall. The metal stairs were slick with something. I tried not to think what, and we tread carefully. My HAB unit door was ajar when we arrived. The simple metal panel hung crookedly on its runners. My stomach lurched. I had left it locked. The faint light inside flickered. I motioned for Ilara to stay back as I gently nudged the door open, wider. The unit was in shambles. It wasn't much to begin with. A single room, a cot, a locker, a tiny shrine, now all tossed and torn. Someone had rifled through in a hurry. My foot nudged an object on the floor, my small hollow frame, now cracked. The smiling faces of my parents in that image, long dead from a manufactorum accident, stared up through the shattered glass. Whoever had broken in probably sought valuables or rations, but there was nothing here of worth. I swallowed down a mix of anger and sorrow. Even my one refuge had been violated by this chaos. Ilara stepped quietly in behind me. "Jonas." "I'm sorry," she said softly, seeing the picture at my feet. I just nodded, bending to pick up the hollow. I slid it into my coat pocket carefully. "Help me look around. There might be something useful." We rummaged quickly. I found my ration pack, thankfully untouched, and a half-full canteen of water. I also pulled a long knife from under my cot, a tool I'd kept for odd jobs, and, truth be told, for self-defense on the rare occasions I ventured near the underhive. It wasn't much, but its weight in my hand gave me a sliver of confidence. I offered Ilara a length of pipe that had been part of my broken chair. "In case you need to hit something," I said with a grim attempt at humour. We were about to leave when a sound froze us in place, a wet gurgling, coming from just outside in the hall. I peeked through the door crack. Lying against the wall opposite my unit was a figure in hive worker fatigues. His torso was a mess of gunshot wounds, probably caught in the PDF sweep. I recognized his face, or what remained of it, Throne. It was old Fennec, my next door neighbour, who led nightly prayers. He was the one whose voice I'd heard through the wall every evening. Before I could react, Fennec's body lurched. A lifeless puppet jerked by unseen strings. He twitched and then turned his head toward our door. His eyes were milky white, a bullet hole through one of them. He should have been dead, yet he moved, somehow animated by the vile disease coursing through him. I heard Alara suck in her breath as Fennec's shattered form began to crawl, bones cracking, toward our doorway. A low growl emanated from his throat, nothing like the kind, soft-spoken neighbor I knew. He dragged himself inch by inch, leaving a smear of dark blood. For a moment, grief and horror paralyzed me. This was a man who had shared his meager Amasec liquor with me during the Emperor's Ascension Festival last year. Now he was a grotesque mockery of life, and he was coming for us. He was almost through the doorway when I stepped forward, jaw clenched. With a shout more of anguish than rage, I brought the knife down into Fennec's back. The blade sank between his vertebrae with a crunch. He hissed and bucked, surprisingly strong, nearly throwing me off. Alara darted forward and swung her length of pipe with a cry, cracking it across Fennec's skull. The old man finally went still, pinned to the floor. I knelt there over his body, chest heaving. Blackish blood oozed around my knife's blade. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. "Emperor, forgive me," I whispered. It felt like I had killed him myself, though reason argued that whatever I ended wasn't truly Fennec anymore. In my childhood, adults would scare us with stories of plague, zombies crawling up from the depths to devour misbehaving children. I had never imagined those stories could hold a shred of truth. Until now. Alara put a trembling hand on my shoulder. "Jonas, we have to go," she urged gently. The commotion could draw unwanted attention. She was right. I withdrew the knife with a sickening squelch and wiped it on a rag. Before leaving, I reached up to the wall, where Fennec's door lay open. Inside his unit lit by a guttering candle, I glimpsed a small altar with a figurine of the Emperor and a scroll of prayers. In a surge of emotion, I snatched the scroll and stuffed it in Fennec's stiff vest pocket, a final respect for the man he had been. Then we slipped away. Moving furtively through back corridors, we managed to avoid further encounters. The cacophony of the Hive was all around us now. Distant gunfire, alarms, the roar of fires. The entire Hive city was unraveling at the seams. "Where do we go?" Alara asked quietly as we paused in an empty loading bay to catch our breath. I didn't have a good answer. Upwards, perhaps. If we could reach the mid-hive, maybe security would be better. Or the spaceport, though that was likely sealed tight by now. Maybe the transit hub, I suggested. If any shuttles are leaving, that's where they'd launch from. It was a thin thread of hope. Unauthorized travel was a heresy in itself, but these were not normal times. She nodded, willing to cling to any hope. "The Medicaid district is on the way to the transit hub," she said. "There might be survivors, or supplies we could use, and..." She hesitated. "I need to know if any of my colleagues made it." That decided it. Our path would take us through the Medicaid facilities, then to the transit hub at the upper levels. With any luck, perhaps we could find sanctuary, or at least answers, along the way. I looked back once in the direction of my hab, where smoke now drifted and the glow of fires painted the corridor orange. The place I'd called home was gone, lost to sickness and purge. I turned to Alara. "Let's go," I said, trying to sound confident for both our sakes. Side by side, we ventured deeper into the dying Hive, each step taking us further from the lives we once knew and closer to whatever doom awaited in the shadows ahead. The approach to the Medicaid district felt like walking through a nightmare. As we drew closer, the hallways took on a sickly hue. Emergency cogitator terminals flickered intermittently, casting jittery light on walls smeared with bloody handprints. The acrid stench of disinfectant fought a losing battle against the sweet rot permeating the air. Finally, we passed under a sign marked Medicus Primus, emergency triage. The glass entry doors hung shattered. Inside, the reception area was a scene from hell. Dozens of bodies were strewn across the floor amid overturned gurneys and spilled medical supplies. Some wore patient gowns, others the white coats of medici staff. Crimson splashes of blood and bile stained every surface. Ilara made a strangled noise and rushed to the nearest figure in a white coat. A woman slumped against the reception desk. She gently turned the woman's face upward. Even in death, the features held a kind serenity. "Doctor, Suri," Ilara breathed, voice quavering. She closed the staring eyes and pressed the woman's hands together over her chest. I realized this had been someone she knew, perhaps a mentor. "I'm sorry," I whispered, placing a hand on Ilara's shoulder. She sniffed hard, wiping her eyes on her sleeve, and stood shakily. We ventured deeper into the triage center. The silence was oppressive, only the hum of failing lights and the squelch of our boots on congealed fluids. Ilara paused to check a few other fallen medicae for any sign of life, but none stirred. Those who hadn't fled were now corpses cooling in the stale air. A wet, chittering noise suddenly echoed from down a dark corridor. We both froze. From the shadows emerged a hideous silhouette, the size of a small dog. In the flicker of a failing lumen strip, I saw it clearly. A bloated, greenish imp-like creature, pot-bellied and covered in oozing sores. It had spindly limbs, and its face, frown. Its face was a leering, sharp-toothed parody of a child's grin. It quivered with muffled giggles, even as viscous drool dripped from its mouth. Ilara clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. The creature tittered and sprang at us with alarming speed. I barely managed to interpose myself, swinging my pipe. The metal struck its bulbous body, knocking it aside with a splatter of foul ichor. It let out a pig-like squeal. Almost immediately, more of the high-pitched snickers answered from the dark hallway. There were others. "Run!" I hissed. We dashed back through reception. Behind us, multiple scuttling forms pattered on the tiles, chittering in glee. One leapt onto my back, clawed fingers tangling in my hair. I yelled and slammed myself against the wall, crushing the imp against it. It fell with a gurgle. Ilara kicked open a side door labelled Ambulance Bay, and we burst through. I shoved the door shut and slammed the emergency lock. A second later, thuds and scratching came from the other side, as the pack of plague imps hurled themselves at it. The metal shuddered but held. Gasping, we found ourselves in the ambulance dock, a sheltered courtyard beneath the Hive's armoured sky roof. The air here was a fraction fresher. We did not linger. 2 Medicoid transport vehicles sat idle, but a quick glance showed their engines destroyed, likely sabotage to prevent the plague spread. All around were signs of hurried evacuation and brutal containment, scorch marks from flamers, piles of charred biohazard bags, and bullet casings glinting under the emergency lights. "We have to keep moving," Ilara said, still catching her breath. I nodded. The imp creature's screeches behind the door grew more frenzied, and I heard the squeal of bending metal. They would find another way around soon enough. There was a service stairwell at the lot's edge that led up to higher levels. We took it, ascending step after step as fast as our exhausted bodies allowed. At each landing we encountered more evidence of catastrophe, blasted doors, bloody handprints, more corpses. We didn't speak. We knew time was running out. Level by level we climbed toward the transit hub concourse. Eventually, an entire stair collapsed above us, perhaps demolished deliberately. We were forced to crawl into a maintenance shaft and use a vertical ladder for the final levels. By the time we pried open a hatch marked Transit Hub Service, our limbs burned and our lungs ached from the exertion. We emerged into a wide, desolate interchange hall not far from the main transit terminal. Somewhere in the distance, alarms wailed, and the unmistakable crackle of gunfire echoed, but here there were only flickering luminators and the distant drip of leaking pipes. We had made it out of the hospital, but the true horrors were yet to come. We crept through the abandoned interchange, heading toward the Grand Plaza adjoining the transit hub. The air was heavy and foul. Green-black molds webbed the corners of the hall, pulsating as if alive. With each step, we saw more signs that reality itself was warping under the plague's influence. Walls bulged with fibrous growths, and the floor squished with slippery fungi. The hive was becoming a garden of rot. At the plaza entrance, we halted. What lay beyond was a tableau of madness. The wide square that once funneled commuters to the hub had become an open-air charnel house. Piles of corpses lay stacked in crude altars. In the center, around a toppled statue of an imperial saint, a ring of human figures swayed and danced in delirious glee. There were perhaps a dozen of them. Even from afar I saw their bodies were riddled with corruption, limbs pocked with oozing sores, faces bloated and discolored. Some wore shreds of uniforms or robes that marked them as former soldiers, clergy, or citizens. Now all were united in sick devotion. They joined hands and spun in a slow circle, chanting a wet, burbling song. Blessed be the boil and the cough. Blessed be the rot that binds us together. In Grandfather's garden we shall grow. From decay springs new life forever. Ilara gripped my arm, her face a mask of horror. These plague worshippers had fully embraced the corruption. I remembered the heretic's cry in the Hab Plaza. Grandfather Nurgle embraces us all. This was what he had promised. These people had given themselves to the plague god. We should find another way, I murmured, but as we turned to retreat, a broken chunk of placrete crunched under my boot. The chanting stopped. Heads snapped toward us with feral alertness. One woman with a half-disintegrated face shrieked, "Non-believers, offer them to Grandfather." With unnerving speed, two of the worshippers broke from the circle and charged at our hiding spot. They brandished makeshift weapons, a rusted cleaver in one hand, a jagged piece of metal in the other. I shoved Ilara behind me and raised my knife and pipe. The first cultist, the one with the cleaver, barreled into me with a giggle. Up close, his eyes were milky white, lips peeled back from blackened gums. He swung wildly. I blocked with the pipe, metal clanging on metal. With my knife I struck low, slashing across his swollen belly. A spill of rancid intestines poured out, and he collapsed, wheezing out a laugh even as he died. The second cultist, a towering bald man with lesions covering his arms, slammed into Ilara, knocking her down. He raised his jagged scrap to stab, roaring praise to Nurgle. I hurled my knife, desperation guiding my hand. The blade sunk into the side of the man's neck. He gurgled and toppled away from Ilara, clawing at the embedded blade as dark blood spurted. Ilara scrambled back to her feet, a crimson gash visible on her forearm, where the cultist's scrap metal had nicked her. I rushed to Ilara and pulled her up. "Come on." We sprinted across the plaza, skirting the corpse piles. Behind us, the remaining cultists howled in rage. One threw a glass bottle that shattered near my feet, splashing foul-smelling ichor that began to smoke and sizzle on the ground. Emperor knew what toxins it contained. As we neared the far end of the square, a booming voice rolled over the hive loudspeakers. "By decree of the Inquisition, this hive is lost. Let all die in Emperor's light. Purge commence." The words were like the sentence of a god. My blood ran cold. An instant later, the plaza was bathed in glaring orange light as incendiary canisters burst from on high. The cultists, still pursuing us, had no time to scream. In a blink, they were engulfed by searing flames. The air itself ignited in a whoosh of heat. The corpse altars became towering bonfires of human remains. "Down!" I shouted, and we threw ourselves behind the base of the fallen statue as a wave of scorching air blasted past. Above the roar of flames, I heard distant explosions echoing throughout the hive. The purge had begun in earnest. The Inquisition was torching everything, living or dead. When the initial flash subsided, we struggled to our feet, half deafened and singed, but alive. The plaza was an inferno behind us, thick smoke billowing upward toward the sundered hive ceiling. Amid the flames, shapes writhed and fell, plague victims and cultists alike caught in the indiscriminate cleansing. Alara coughed, pulling the collar of her coat over her mouth against the acrid smoke. I grabbed her hand. There was no time to lose. Together we stumbled away from the conflagration, heading for the transit hub gates now visible through the haze. The grand entrance stood open, its adamantine doors ajar as if the people who fled had left in a hurry. Beyond, the transit hall beckoned, dark and seemingly empty. We crossed the threshold, leaving the screams and fires behind, and entered the cavernous space of the hub. Silence. The terminal was deserted, a husk of what it once was. Rows of benches, security cordons, and pick screens lay abandoned. Luggage and personal effects were scattered about where panicked crowds must have once bolted for evacuation shuttles that never came. Dim emergency illuminators cast our elongated shadows on the polished marble floor. Far above, through the arched glass roof of the terminal, I could see the boiling glow of fires consuming the upper levels of the hive. Ash rained down like filthy snow. A low rumble reverberated. Something in the distance collapsed under the onslaught. We moved further in, past a flickering hololith that still displayed a frozen departure schedule. At the central concourse, we found the embarkation decks. Through tall windows, I spotted several grounded shuttles on the launch pads outside, their sleek hulls dark and lifeless. They had been grounded by lockdown, abandoned to await destruction. Alara slumped against a pillar, overcome by exhaustion and despair. "They're really going to kill everyone," she whispered. Her eyes reflected the distant fires. No evacuation, just this. She didn't have to say the word exterminatus for me to feel its weight. I put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as we stood in that ruined transit hall. "I am so sorry," I found myself saying, though I wasn't sure to whom. To her, for failing to save her world. To all the innocents damned by this plague. My apology was as futile as our hope of escape. A series of distant thunderclaps rattled the glass in the terminal. The final act was approaching. We had maybe minutes left. Alara turned to me, eyes full of pain and something like regret. "Jonas, if only we had met in another life, another time," she said softly. Her lower lip trembled. "We might have had a chance." I managed a sad smile and brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. "In another life," I agreed. The reality we faced was that our lives were about to end here, in the embers of our world. But in that moment, the only reality I cared about was her and me. Gently, I drew her into my arms. She came willingly, resting her head against my shoulder. Despite the reek of smoke and death around us, I breathed in the scent of her hair, committing it to memory. We were both filthy, battered, on the verge of collapse, but to me, she had never been more beautiful. "I don't want to die alone," she confessed in a broken whisper. "You're not alone," I murmured, tilting her chin up. Our eyes met, hers a storm of fear, sorrow, and, yes, love. In that final sharing, we found a shred of light amid darkness. I leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were warm and soft, and for a few fleeting heartbeats, the burning hive, the plague, the terror, all of it fell away. In that kiss we poured everything, our grief, our gratitude, the promise of what could have been. When we finally parted, tears glistened on her lashes, and I realized mine were flowing too. Whatever came next, we would meet it together. We had been robbed of a future, but at least in the end we'd found each other. It was a small solace, but in this nightmare it meant the galaxy to me. We stayed locked in that embrace for a moment longer, but fate was not done with us. As I held Alara, I felt a shudder run through her body. She drew a sharp breath and pulled back, a look of alarm on her face. Jonas, she managed. Before a violent cough racked her, my heart plummeted. She doubled over, coughing again, wet and red. Blood speckled her lips. In the harsh hangar light, I saw it. Dark veins were spreading like cobwebs beneath the skin of her neck, creeping up from under her collar. No. Emperor, no. Alara, I choked out, already knowing. She must have been wounded or exposed. Perhaps that cultist's blade had done more damage than it seemed. In the agony and adrenaline of the last hour, neither of us had realized. She met my eyes, tears spilling. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice trembling. A red tear rolled down her cheek, where blood from her cough had mixed with tears. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I was fine. I shook my head desperately, denial roaring in my ears. It's okay. You'll be okay. We have meds. We can slow it, I babbled, searching around for a medkit, for anything. But even as I spoke, Alara sagged against me. Her skin was growing fever hot, sweat beading on her brow. She gripped the front of my coat, trying to steady herself. Jonas, it hurts, she whimpered. I can feel it inside me, burning. I held her close, cradling her head against my chest. My mind raced for a solution, but there was none. We both knew what this plague did and how fast. She had minutes at best. Her fingers tightened weakly, and she looked up at me with sudden clarity through the pain. You have to do it, she gasped out. I recoiled, tears spilling freely down my cheeks. Number, don't ask me that. Please, she begged, pressing something into my hand. My knife, slick with blood. Her own hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. You promised. We face the end together. Don't let me become one of those things. Sobs choked me. My vision blurred. Alara, Emperor, forgive me. My hand closed over the knife's hilt. She nodded faintly and closed her eyes, turning her face slightly, as if in acceptance. I kissed her forehead, tears falling onto her skin. I love you, I whispered. Then I drove the blade into the side of her throat. Alara jerked in my arms, a sharp exhale all she could manage. Her eyes opened one last time, meeting mine with something like gratitude amidst the pain. Then the light in them faded. Her body went limp, collapsing gently against me as a river of blood poured warm over my hands. A keening, animal wail tore from my throat. I lowered her to the floor, withdrawing the knife with trembling fingers. Blood pooled around her neck. She looked peaceful now, as if asleep despite the gore. But I had killed her. I had saved her soul only by destroying the woman I loved. I hunched over Alara's body, racked with grief beyond any tears. Around us, alarms blared and the floor quaked. The final destruction of the hive was underway. But I didn't care. Let the Emperor's fury take me. Let the plague take me. Nothing mattered anymore. A new sound filtered through the cacophony. A wet, squelching noise, accompanied by deep, bubbling laughter. I looked up from Alara's still form, eyes burning. In the center of the hangar, reality was ripping open. A sickly green haze seeped from a widening tear in the air. A gargantuan hand, swollen and dripping with pus, gripped the edges of the rift and pried it wide. Something immense forced its way through, and I realized in numb horror that a demon of Nurgle was manifesting before my eyes. It was a mountainous, bloated caricature of a man, easily several stories tall. Its skin was leathery and necrotic, pockmarked with running sores and crawling buboes. Through great rents in its abdomen spilled coils of rotten intestines, swaying like obscene vines. Lesser creatures, tiny Nurglings, like the ones we'd seen, clung to their grandfather, wriggling in and out of its pustules and wounds, giggling with hellish delight while suckling on the foul ichor oozing from them. A cloud of flies swarmed around the demon's hulking form, buzzing so loudly it was like the drone of engines. The plague god's greater demon had come to claim the last scraps of this world. It surveyed the hangar with milky, rheumy eyes. When its gaze fell upon me and the blood-soaked corpse of Alara, the creature's lipless mouth stretched into a hideous facsimile of a kindly smile. The beast laughed, a booming, jovial sound that made my skin crawl. Children, it gurgled, voice like sludge bubbling in a drain. Grandfather is here. Do not fear the end. Rejoice, for decay is only a new beginning. Its words echoed through the burning ruins. The demon then regarded me directly, tilting its massive head. Ah, such sweet sorrow, it crooned, its tone one of hideous mockery. Your despair? It feeds me well, little mortal. I was empty, drained of fear, drained of everything but anger. This monstrosity dared to speak of my despair as sustenance. It dared to find joy in Alara's death. Something snapped inside me. Gently I laid Alara's body down and rose to my feet. My knife was still in my bloody hand. I faced the immense demon, a mere insect before a titan. You, I snarled, voice cracked and broken. You took her from me. You took everything. The great unclean one's rheumy eyes widened in mock surprise. Then it chuckled. Come then, child. Embrace grandfather's love. Let your anger melt into the blessed caress of rot. It opened its arms as if to welcome me into an embrace, foul fluids spilling from under its crusted, sagging flesh. Rage propelled me forward. With a raw scream, I charged the abomination. It watched me impassively as I sprinted across the buckling floor, knife raised. I might have heard it give a soft, eager giggle. I drove the blade into the demon's ankle with all my strength. The point sank into spongy, putrid flesh. A torrent of viscous yellow-green pus erupted from the wound, dousing my arms. The acidic stench was overwhelming, but I didn't stop. I slashed and stabbed again, sobbing Alara's name, pouring every ounce of fury and anguish into each blow. The colossal creature barely reacted to my assault. Finally, with almost lazy disdain, it swung a massive, clawed hand at me. I had no chance to dodge. The back of its hand hit me like a freight hauler. I flew across the hangar and smashed into a ferrocrete column. White-hot pain exploded in my ribs and back. I crumpled to the ground, my knife clattering away. Something inside my chest felt broken. Perhaps several somethings. I tasted coppery blood on my tongue. Vision swimming. I forced myself up to a half-sitting position. The great unclean one loomed nearer, a mountain of rot and shadow. It raised one elephantine leg, preparing to stomp me into paste. Before it could bring its foot down, the heavens opened. A blinding spear of light lanced through the shattered roof of the hive, so bright and pure that for a split second I thought the Emperor himself had descended. The demon froze, its grotesque foot still hovering above me. In that heartbeat, the cleansing light blossomed into an all-consuming explosion. The transit hub and everything for kilometers vaporized in searing fire. The last thing I saw as I squinted upward was the demon's form dissolving into a spray of putrescent mist, its bellowing roar of anger and fear drowned out by the righteous fury of the blast. I felt no pain. One moment I was beneath the monster's shadow, the next I was bathed in incandescent white, heat without heat, light without end. I sensed my body breaking apart, atom by atom, yet within that instant I found peace. I thought of Alara. In the blinding glow, I swore I saw her standing before me, whole and unharmed. She smiled, reaching out her hand. I reached back. In the Emperor's mercy, our spirits left the horror and the pain behind. There was no more fear, there was no more sorrow, only the light, and in it, we were together.